Welcome to this micro-teaching session on Rawls as a theory of justice. These sessions are aimed at those just starting out in political theory, just trying to get a handle on some of the basic ideas and views within the field. And we start with Rawls because Rawls is one of the primary architects of modern political theory. And today I'm going to be talking about Rawls' fantastic book, started it all, Theory of Justice. Rawls' view of justice, his conception of justice, comes up a lot as the term justice as fairness. Should tell us something already. Justice as fairness is a view about justice that's different to, say, utilitarianism, Rawls' main opponent. Rawls begins the theory of justice by telling us that justice is the first virtue of social institutions, and that laws and institutions, however efficient or well-regulated or well-run, must be rejected if they are unjust. So we learn two things right from the outset of the book. First of all, justice is the primary virtue, the main thing that counts. If we don't get justice, then everything else is secondary. Second, that justice applies to institutions, not to say individual actions. So the site of justice is what we often think of as the state, the organs of the state, the social, political and economic institutions under which we live. Why is this the appropriate subject matter? Because the effects of the state and the shape of the state profoundly affect our lives, from cradle to grave. Different distributions of rights, liberties, wealth and income, opportunities, will affect the kinds of lives that citizens can lead. So it's really important that we get the rules for that right. How do we decide what the right rules for our institutions are? Well, one method that Rawls offers in a theory of justice for thinking about justice, for deciding on the correct rules, is what he calls the original position, which is a thought experiment for thinking about justice. Rawls says when we deliberate about justice within the original position, we should do so absent certain information about ourselves, information that might skew our deliberations to benefit us partially. This is what he calls the veil of ignorance. The kinds of things that we should eliminate from our thought process, that we should set aside, are things like our social background, what family we're born into, what social class we're born into, whatever natural talents or lack thereof that we might have, what our conception of the good life is, what makes our lives valuable, and several other things. We should think about justice without knowledge of those things. When we're thinking about justice, we should also think about it in terms of the goods that get distributed. What is it that the institutions that we live under distribute? What are they responsible for? These are what Rawls calls primary social goods. And this covers things like rights and liberties, freedoms to do certain things. It also covers opportunities to education, jobs, positions of political influence, and so on. It covers things like wealth and income, material goods that we need in order to live. And it covers something that Rawls calls the social basis of self-respect. In addition, Rawls says when we think about justice, we should act as though we are mutually disinterested. In other words, we're neither envious nor altruistic. If we think about justice in this way, what would we choose? Well, Rawls says, in order to help us choose, we should adopt a strategy or a decision rule, which he calls maximin. In other words, when we're thinking about justice absent this information, we should think about it in the sense that we don't know what our particular position in society might be. And therefore, we should think about it as if we were in the worst possible position. If it turned out that we were in the worst possible position, we would want that position to be as good as it possibly could be. In other words, we would want to maximize the minimum position, just in case we ended up being in that position once the veil of ignorance is lifted. If we adopt maximin as a decision rule, because we're concerned about being in that bottom position, concerned about living a life in the bottom position from cradle to grave, then we would pick Rawls' two principles of justice, he says. First principle of justice, the basic liberties principle, guarantees for each citizen an equal set of basic liberties, freedoms to do certain things. The second principle, which is divided into two parts, firstly covers opportunities. The opportunities should be distributed in an equal manner. And finally, the difference principle covers wealth and income and the social basis of self-respect. That material goods like wealth and income should be distributed so that they maximise the position of the worst off. Rawls is no strict egalitarian. There may be inequality in the rules in society, but it will be tied to making the worst off the best off they possibly could be. Now, Rawls tells us that these principles are lexically ordered. A lexicographer is someone that assembles dictionaries. That has a certain rule to it, i.e., you have to complete all the A's before you go on to any of the B's. And the same with Rawls' two principles of justice. In societies beyond a certain level of material wealth, we have to satisfy the basic liberties principles first. That's why Rawls is a liberal, because liberty has priority. Only after that can we think about opportunities, satisfying fair equality of opportunity. And only after that is completed can we think about how we distribute wealth and income. So we can't, for instance, trade off some freedoms for greater levels of material wealth. Now, this should give us answers to basic questions. One, why is social justice important? That's in this area of the board. We should be able to answer that question because of the profound effects that institutions have on the shape of our lives. Secondly, why is Rawls a social contract theorist? Because of the method that he uses and the underlying idea that the principles of justice are based on agreement. Third, why are the things excluded by the veil of ignorance arbitrary from a moral point of view, as Rawls puts it? Because those things like social background, natural talents, are matters of luck. Families that we are born into, the talents that we have, are largely matters of luck. And that would skew deliberations about justice unfairly. Fourthly, why would the parties choose the two principles of justice? Well, because they would be concerned about where they might be in society and the possibility of being in the worst off position. So they would seek to maximise that minimum position. And that is the basic broad shape of Rawls' view.